Shabbat shalom, everyone. The year is 1415, and King Charles VI of France has a problem. Well, technically, he has a lot of problems, specifically a lot of mental problems. History books tell us that Charles VI of France was plagued with a myriad of mental illnesses, hence the reason he is oftentimes referred to as the lovely moniker Charles the Mad. And the most famous condition that he suffered from was the belief that he was made from glass. That's right, France's king and chief decision maker of the whole country was delusional and convinced that his body had turned into glass. So much so that he ordered that all of his clothing was to be made with steel beams sewn into the seams in order to protect himself from shattering. And there was an official royal decree that went out, and no one was allowed to touch the king for fear that they might break him. Oy. Now, as bad as that sounds, Charles VI had an even bigger problem, a guy named King Henry V of England, who believed that through divine birthright that it was he who was the rightful heir to the French throne, and that Charles VI had stolen it or taken it from him. Now, I won't bore you with the details of Henry's lineage, but most modern historians agree that Henry's French ancestry did give him the right to declare his kingship over France, but Charles the Mad King disagreed with this assertion. And according to William Shakespeare, who immortalized this whole anecdote in his now famous play simply called Henry V, after Henry sent a royal letter to France declaring his birthright over the French throne, the Mad King sent him back a letter basically telling him to go jump in the lake. And he included with this letter a box of tennis balls with a note telling Henry that he should stick to playing kids' games rather than making declarations of kingship. Henry did not like this. And because of this one insult, he restarted the 100 Years' War with France by sailing with an army to attack a French port town called Harfleur. Now, this was supposed to be a pretty easy victory for Henry in the campaign season, but many of his men, while fighting, got sick, and the French held his army off for weeks. Finally, Henry conquers Harfleur, but he doesn't want to give up his conquest of France just yet, so he orders his men to march on through the French countryside toward a northern stronghold called Calais. But weeks of dysentery and sickness has pummeled his army, and he is left with only about 6,000 soldiers, many of whom are just simple peasants who have been made into archers, and the rest of his men are just men-at-arms. He has no mounted knights on horseback to speak of. Very difficult to run an effective war without any of this. At this point, Henry's army has almost run out of food. They are all exhausted after weeks of marching, and his advisors beg him to turn around and sail home. But as he weighs out his options, his army spots an entire legion of French knights on top of a hill near a town called Agincourt. After seeing these knights, it is clear to Henry and his whole army that the English are outnumbered at least 3-1. The French have the high ground, and after word got out that Henry and his army were basically sitting ducks, French lords and dukes from all over France have come to kick him while he's down. These knights demand to be placed at the front line so they can have the honor and bragging rights of annihilating Henry's army. To make matters worse, the sky opens up and begins to pour, creating a vast mud field between these two armies. What is Henry to do? Henry orders his archers to place huge wooden spikes in the ground as a little barrier for the French horses, and he waits for the perfect time to strike. Hours pass, and legend has it that Henry saw the French army eating their lunch on the hillside. I like to imagine they have croissants or little baguettes. Eh, oui, oui. They're just eating their lunch. And it was here that Henry supposedly made his inspirational St. Crispin's Day speech. This happened on October 25th, by the way, Rabbi Kaplinski's birthday. And as is canonized in Shakespeare's play, we few, we happy few, we band of brothers, he rallies his troops to attack while the French are still mid-bite. He orders his archers to fire their arrows upwards at an angle, which results in a massive downpour of arrows on the unsuspecting French knights. And although the French were wearing the most expensive armor that money could buy at the time, the velocity of the arrows coming down proved too much for even their expensive plate mail, and thousands of mountain knights are massacred on the hillside while in between bites of croissant. They tried to attack Henry's army below, but the mud field was difficult to ride through, and their horses' legs get stuck in the mess, leaving them vulnerable to more and more arrows that keep raining down on top of them. The knights that somehow charge through the muddy battlefield are thrown from their horses after their animals are impaled by the wooden stakes that the archers set up. And many of the knights, after thrown off of their horses, are unable to get up from the mud in their heavy armor. Upon seeing this vulnerability, Henry bravely leads his troops into battle, fighting at the very front of the siege, wearing a golden crown adorned with symbols of England and France all over his tunic. And hours later, my friends, the French suffer a catastrophic defeat. Historians estimate that 16,000 French noblemen, not peasants, noblemen, were killed that day, with thousands and thousands more taken prisoner. One professor noted, quote, "The list of French casualties read like a roll call of the military and political leaders of a past generation. Entire villages of Frenchmen were killed, with whole families of noble lineages wiped out in one single day. And in total, only 112 of Henry's men were lost at Agincourt." Now, after such a bloody historical event, one has to wonder what can be learned from this story. Well, I think I have the answer. Never take someone's birthright. It is this sentiment, by the way, which is likewise the conflict for our Torah's portion this week, Parshat Toldot. The Torah tells us about Isaac and Rebekah's twin boys, Esau and Jacob. Esau was apparently a skilled hunter and outdoorsman, but Jacob was a mild man who liked to stay back at the campsite. We're told that Isaac favored Esau for his hunting skills, but Rebekah favored Jacob. The crux of our story begins when Jacob was at home and Esau returned back to the camp completely exhausted and famished from the hunt, and demanded some of Jacob's red lentil stew. According to the story, Jacob countered that Esau must first sell him his birthrights, and Esau did so with an oath, spurning his own birthright. To make matters worse, toward the end of our Parsha, Jacob deceives his own father by disguising himself as Esau, convinces Isaac to give him his brother's blessing before he dies. Now, by all accounts, this is a disgusting but sly move on Jacob's part. Jacob had already outwitted Esau, who in a moment of hunger and weakness sold his birthright for a bowl of stew. But Jacob's claim to the blessing of the firstborn was not just a question of inheritance. It was a question of who Jacob believed that he was. He didn't just want the material advantage of the birthright. He wanted to be the one who stood at the head of his family, who would receive the promise of the patriarchs, who would carry on the legacy of his father. Now, after thinking about these two stories, I have to wonder, was it right for Jacob to deceive his family? And furthermore, was Henry V justified in claiming the French throne through acts of war? Unfortunately, regardless of what I think, history happened anyway. And look where it led us. I think this is where the story of Jacob and Esau and Henry V converge in a powerful lesson. God makes God's will happen, even through flawed human choices. Jacob might have stolen the blessing, but he is still the one who carried on the line of the patriarchs. I mean, we mention his name in the Amidah every day. Jacob goes on to literally become Yisrael, the father of our 12 tribes. His deception didn't negate his divine purpose. It set the stage for a deeper understanding of who he would become. And likewise, Henry's victory reshaped the course of history, solidifying England's claim to France and changing the fate of Europe for generations to come. So what can these two stories teach us? Well, first, I think they show that the path to greatness is oftentimes paved with struggle, sacrifice, controversy, and unfortunately, sometimes moral ambiguity. Both Jacob and Henry, in their pursuit of what they believed was their right, engaged in acts that could be seen as ethically questionable. Yet, they were also acting according to the unique destiny that they felt called to fulfill. In the case of Jacob, it was about fulfilling God's promise to Abraham and Isaac, even if that meant using fraudulent means. And for Henry, it was about proving to the world, to himself, that he was worthy of kingship. Now, was all of this destiny, God's divine plan, or was it just history playing itself out? I'll let you decide. Now, because you're all Torah-loving Jews, you probably know what comes next for Jacob and Esau. If you don't, we'll read about it next week. But you might not know what happened to Henry V, so allow me to enlighten you. After the Battle of Agincourt, Henry would go on to marry the Mad King's daughter, Catherine, and she would bear him a son named Henry VI. Go figure. Henry would never get to meet his infant son or become the King of France because he himself dies of dysentery in 1422. Oy. This new king, Henry, however, his son, is the only English monarch to have been crowned King of France and England, bringing our story to a close. Now, friends, if you like this sermon, I am especially pleased. But I ask that you do not shake my hand after services, because it has come to my attention that I am made of glass. Shabbat shalom. Duh.